Hello friends, and welcome to tonight's edition of Sleep Story. If you wish to get notified when the next sleep story is ready for you, I would encourage you to subscribe. If you would like to support the channel further or get access to exclusive content, you can explore those options by clicking the join button. In order to prepare ourselves for a good night's rest, I will take you on a journey to a sandy beach and an inviting hammock. If you would like to skip this relaxation exercise, you can do so and go straight to the stories with the timestamp in the description. And now, it is time to unwind. Settle into a comfortable position in your bed. Close your eyes and take a deep, gentle breath. You can feel the support of your mattress beneath you. Let's take a journey tonight to a tranquil tropical beach where you will relax in a hammock overlooking the serene blue ocean. Imagine yourself walking along a pristine white sand beach. The sand is soft and warm beneath your bare feet, and the gentle sound of waves lapping at the shore soothes your senses. The sky is a shade of brilliant blue, with only a few wispy clouds drifting lazily by. A gentle breeze carries the salty scent of the ocean, mingled with the sweet fragrance of tropical flowers. As you stroll along the shoreline, you come across a perfect spot shaded by tall, swaying palm trees. Between two of these palms, a hammock is gently swaying in the breeze, inviting you to come and rest. The hammock is made of soft, woven fabric and is adorned with plush pillows in vibrant colors, adding to its allure. Take a step closer to the hammock. Feel the texture of the sand beneath your feet. The late afternoon sand feels warm between your toes, and hear the soft rustle of the palm leaves overhead. The hammock is perfectly positioned to offer a view of the turquoise ocean, stretching out to the horizon, its surface sparkling in the late day sunlight. The sight of the calm, clear water instantly brings a sense of peace and relaxation. Gently lower yourself into the hammock, feeling its soft, supportive embrace. The plush pillows provide perfect comfort for your head and back, allowing you to fully relax. The hammock sways gently with your movements, creating a soothing, rhythmic motion. The shade of the palm trees keeps you cool and comfortable, and the breeze carries the sound of the ocean waves, adding to the tranquil ambiance. As you lie back in the hammock, take in the beauty around you. The ocean is a mesmerizing shade of blue, its surface dotted with gentle waves. A few seagulls glide gracefully overhead, their calls blending harmoniously with the sound of the waves. Nearby, vibrant tropical flowers bloom in a riot of colors, and a small crab scuttles along the sand, leaving delicate tracks behind. As you breathe, focus on the sensation of the air filling your lungs and the feeling of relaxation as you breathe out. With each breath, imagine the tranquility of the tropical beach and the gentle sway of the hammock filling you. As you continue to breathe deeply and steadily, let your mind's eye wander over the details of the scene. Notice the sparkle of sunlight on the water, the intricate patterns of the palm leaves above, and the soft shadows they cast on the sand. The gentle, repetitive sound of the waves creates a calming rhythm, lulling you into a deeper state of relaxation. Feel a sense of connection with this peaceful place. Imagine the cool breeze gently caressing your skin, the soft, supportive embrace of the hammock, and the steady heartbeat of the ocean. Allow this connection to deepen, filling you with a profound sense of peace and belonging. Let your thoughts drift like the waves on the shore, calm and unhurried. Feel the serenity of the beach wrapping around you like a warm, comforting blanket. Your day is done. There is nothing left for you to do today. With each breath, you feel your body grow heavier and your mind quieter. You are in a place of pure tranquility, safe and serene on the tropical beach. Allow yourself to drift off into a night of restful, rejuvenating sleep, carried by the gentle whispers of the ocean and the comforting sway of the hammock. Miss Calista's Peppermint Bottle. Miss Calista was perplexed. Her nephew, Caleb Cramp, who had been her right-hand man for years, and whom she had got well broken into her ways, had gone to the Klondike, leaving her to fill his place with the next best man. But the next best man was slow to appear, and meanwhile Miss Calista was looking about her warily. She could afford to wait a while, for the crop was all in and the fall ploughing done, so that the need of a successor to Caleb was not as pressing as it might otherwise have been. There was no lack of applicants. Such as they were, was known to be a kind and generous mistress, although she had her ways, and insisted calmly and immovably upon wholehearted compliance with them. She had a small, well-cultivated farm, and a comfortable house, and her hired man lived in clover. Caleb Cramp had been perfection after his kind, and Miss Calista did not expect to find his equal. Nevertheless, she set up a certain standard of requirements, and although 3 weeks, during which Miss Calista had been obliged to put up with the immature services of a neighbor's boy, had elapsed since Caleb's departure, no one had as yet stepped into his vacant and coveted shoes. Certainly, Miss Calista was somewhat hard to please, but she was not thinking of herself as she sat by her front window in the chilly November twilight. Instead, she was musing on the degeneration of hired men, and reflecting that it was high time the wheat was threshed, the house banked, and sundry other duties attended to. Jess Mabin had been up that afternoon to negotiate for the vacant place, and had offered to give satisfaction for smaller wages than Miss Calista had ever paid. But he had met with a brusque refusal, scarcely as civil as Miss Calista had bestowed on drunken Jake Stinson from the Mooresvale Road. Not that Miss Calista had any particular prejudice against Jess Mabin, or knew anything positively to his discredit. She was simply unconsciously following the example of a world that exerts itself to keep a man down when he's down, and prevent all chance of his rising. Nothing succeeds like success, and the converse of this is likewise true, that nothing fails like failure. There was not a person in Cooperstown who would not have heartily endorsed Miss Calista's refusal. Jess Mabin was only 18, although he looked several years older, and although no flagrant misdoing had ever been proved against him. Suspicion of such was not wanting. He came of a bad stock, people said sagely, adding that what was bred in the bone was bound to come out in the flesh. His father, old Sam Mabin, had been a shiftless and tricky rascal, as everyone knew, and had ended his days in the poorhouse. Jess's mother had died when he was a baby, and he had come up somehow, in a hand-to-mouth fashion, with all the cloud of heredity hanging over him. He was always looked at askance, and when any mischief came to light in the village, it was generally fastened on him as a convenient and handy scapegoat. He was considered sulky and lazy, and the local prophets united in predicting a bad end for him sooner or later, and, moreover, diligently endeavored by their general treatment of him to put him in a fair way to fulfill their predictions. Miss Calista, when she had shut Chester Mabin out into the chill gloom of the November dusk, dismissed him from her thoughts. There were other things of more moment to her just then than old Sam Mabin's hopeful son. There was nobody in the house but herself, and although this was neither alarming nor unusual, it was unusual, and Miss Calista considered it alarming, that the sum of $500 should at that very moment be in the upper right-hand drawer of the sideboard, which sum had been, up to the previous day, safe in the coffers of the Milledgeville Bank. But certain unfavorable rumors were in course of circulation about that same institution, and Miss Calista, who was nothing if not prudent, had gone to the bank that very morning and withdrawn her deposit. She intended to go over to Carytown the very next day and deposit it in the savings bank there. Not another day would she keep it in the house, and indeed it worried her to think she must keep it even for the night, as she had told Mrs. Galloway that afternoon during a neighborly backyard chat. "Not but what it's safe enough," she said, "for not a soul but you knows I've got it. But I'm not used to have so much by me, and there are always tramps going round. It worries me somehow. I wouldn't give it a thought if Caleb was here. I suppose being all alone makes me nervous." Miss Calista was still rather nervous when she went to bed that night, but she was a woman of sound sense and was determined not to give way to foolish fears. She locked doors and windows carefully, as was her habit, and saw that the fastenings were good and secure. The one on the dining room window, looking out on the backyard, wasn't. In fact, it was broken altogether, but as Miss Calista told herself, it had been broken just so for the last 6 years, and nobody had ever tried to get in at it yet. And it wasn't likely anyone would begin tonight. Miss Calista went to bed, and, despite her worry, slept soon and soundly. It was well on past midnight when she suddenly wakened and sat bolt upright in bed. She was not accustomed to waken in the night, and she had the impression of having been awakened by some noise. She listened breathlessly. Her room was directly over the dining room, and an empty stovepipe hole opened up through the ceiling of the latter at the head of her bed. There was no mistake about it. Something or some person was moving about stealthily in the room below. It wasn't a cat. Miss Calista had shut him in the woodshed before she went to bed, and he couldn't possibly get out. It must certainly be a beggar or tramp of some description. Miss Calista might be given over to nervousness in regard to imaginary thieves, but in the presence of real danger, she was cool and self-reliant. As noiselessly and swiftly as any burglar himself, Miss Calista slipped out of bed and into her clothes. Then she tiptoed out into the hall. The late moonlight streaming in through the hall window was enough illumination for her purpose, and she got downstairs and was fairly in the open doorway of the dining room before a sound betrayed her presence. Standing at the sideboard, hastily ransacking the neat contents of an open drawer, stood a man's figure, dimly visible in the moonlight gloom. As Miss Calista's grim form appeared in the doorway, the midnight marauder turned with a start and then, with an inarticulate cry, sprang not at the courageous lady, but at the open window behind him. Miss Calista, realizing with a flash of comprehension that he was escaping her, had a woman-like impulse to get a blow in anyhow. She grasped and hurled at her unceremonious caller the first thing that came to hand, a bottle of peppermint essence that was standing on the sideboard. The missile hit the escaping thief squarely on the shoulder as he sprang out of the window, and the fragments of glass came clattering down on the sill. The next moment Miss Calista found herself alone, standing by the sideboard in a half-decent fashion, for the whole thing had passed with such lightning-like rapidity that it almost seemed as if it were the dissolving end of a bad dream. But the open drawer and the window, where the bits of glass were glistening in the moonlight, were no dream. Miss Calista recovered herself speedily, closed the window, lit the lamp, gathered up the broken glass, and set up the chairs which the would-be thief had upset in his exit. An examination of the sideboard showed the precious 500, safe and sound in an undisturbed drawer. Miss Calista kept grim watch and ward there until morning, and thought the matter over exhaustively. In the end she resolved to keep her own counsel. She had no clue whatever to the thief's whereabouts or identity. and no good would come of making a fuss, which might only end in throwing suspicion on someone who might be quite innocent. When the morning came, Miss Calista lost no time in setting out for Kerrywood, where the money was soon safely deposited in the bank. She heaved a sigh of relief when she left the building. "I feel as if I could enjoy life once more," she said to herself. "Goodness me, if I'd had to keep that money by me for a week itself, I'd have been a raving lunatic by the end of it." Miss Calista had shopping to do, and friends to visit in town, so that the dull autumn day was well nigh spent when she finally got back to Cooperstown and paused at the corner store to get a bundle of matches. The store was full of men, smoking and chatting around the fire, and Miss Calista, whose pet abomination was tobacco smoke, was not at all minded to wait any longer than she could help. But Abiram Fell was attending to a previous customer, and Miss Calista sat grimly down by the counter to wait her turn. The door opened, letting in a swirl of raw November evening wind. "And Ches Mayben." He nodded sullenly to Mr. Fell and passed down the store to mutter a message to a man at the further end. Miss Calista lifted her head as he passed and sniffed the air as a charger who scents battle. The smell of tobacco was strong, and so was that of the open boxes of dried herring on the counter. But plainly, above all the commingled odors of a country grocery, Miss Calista caught a whiff of peppermint, so strong as to leave no doubt of its origin. There had been no hint of it before Ches Mayben's entrance. The latter did not wait long. He was out and striding along the shadowy road when Miss Calista left the store and drove smartly after him. It never took Miss Calista long to make up her mind about anything, and she had weighed and passed judgment on Ches Mayben's case while Mr. Fell was doing up her matches. The lad glanced up furtively as she checked her fat grey pony beside him. "Good evening, Chester," she said with brisk kindness. "I can give you a lift if you are going my way. Jump in, quick. Dapple is a little restless." A wave of crimson, duskily perceptible under his sunburnt skin, surged over Ches Mayben's face. It almost seemed as if he were going to blurt out a blunt refusal, but Miss Callista's face was so guileless, and her tone so friendly, that he thought better of it and sprang in beside her. And Dapple broke into an impatient trot down the long hill lined with its bare, wind-ridden maples. After a few minutes' silence, Miss Calista turned to her moody companion. "Chester," she said, as tranquilly as if about to ask him the most ordinary question in the world. "Why did you climb into my house last night and try to steal my money?" Ches Mayben started convulsively, as if he meant to spring from the buggy at once, but Miss Callista's hand was on his arm, in a grasp, none the less firm because of its gentleness, and there was a warning gleam in her grey eyes. "It won't mend matters trying to get clear of me, Chester. I know it was you, and I want an answer, a truthful one, mind you, to my question. I am your friend, and I am not going to harm you if you tell me the truth." Her clear and incisive gaze met and held irresistibly the boy's wavering one. The sullen obstinacy of his face relaxed. "Well," he muttered finally, "I was just desperate, that's why. I've never done anything real bad in my life before, but people have always been down on me. I'm blamed for everything, and nobody wants anything to do with me. I'm willing to work, but I can't get a thing to do. I'm in rags, and I haven't a cent. And winter's coming on. I heard you telling Miss Galloway yesterday about the money. I was behind the fir hedge, and you didn't see me. I went away and planned it all out. I get in some way, and I meant to use the money to get away out west as far from here as I could, and begin life there, where nobody knew me, and where I'd have some sort of a chance. I've never had any here. You can put me in jail now, if you like. They'll feed and clothe me there, anyhow, and I'll be on a level with the rest. The boy had blurted it all out sullenly and half-jokingly. A word of rebellion and protest against the fate that had always dragged him down was couched in his voice. Miss Calista drew Dapple to a standstill before her gate. I'm not going to send you to jail, Chester. I believe you've told me the truth. Yesterday you wanted me to give you Caleb's place and I refused. Well, I offer it to you now. If you'll come, I'll hire you and give you as good wages as I gave him. Ches Mabin looked incredulous. Miss Calista, you can't mean it. I do mean it, every word. You say you have never had a chance. Well, I'm going to give you one. A chance to get on the right road and make a man of yourself. Nobody shall ever know about last night's doings from me, and I'll make it my business to forget them if you deserve it. What do you say? Ches lifted his head and looked her squarely in the face. I'll come, he said huskily. It ain't no use to try and thank you, Miss Calista, but I'll live my thanks. And he did. The good people of Cooperstown held up their hands in horror when they heard that Miss Calista had hired Ches Mabin, and prophesied that the deluded woman would live to repent her rash step. But not all prophecies come true. Miss Calista smiled serenely and kept on her own misguided way. And Ches Mabin proved so efficient and steady that the arrangement was continued, and in due time people outlived their old suspicions and came to regard him as a thorough, smart, and trustworthy young man. Miss Calista has made a man of Ches Mabin, said the oracles. He ought to be very grateful to her. And he was. But only he and Miss Calista and the peppermint bottle ever knew the precise extent of his gratitude, and they never told. The Romance of Aunt Beatrice. Margaret always maintains that it was a direct inspiration of Providence that took her across the street to see Aunt Beatrice that night. And Aunt Beatrice believes that it was too. But the truth of the matter is that Margaret was feeling very unhappy, and went over to talk to Aunt Beatrice as the only alternative to a fit of crying. Margaret's unhappiness has nothing further to do with this story, so it may be dismissed with the remark that it did not amount to much, in spite of Margaret's tragical attitude, and was dissipated at once and forever by the arrival of a certain missent letter the next day. Aunt Beatrice was alone. Her brother and his wife had gone to the at-home which Mrs. Cunningham was giving that night in honor of the Honorable John Reynolds, M.P. The children were upstairs in bed, and Aunt Beatrice was darning their stockings, a big basketful of which loomed up aggressively on the table beside her. Or, to speak more correctly, she had been darning them. Just when Margaret was sliding across the icy street, Aunt Beatrice was bent forward in her chair, her hands over her face, while soft, shrinking little sobs shook her from head to foot. When Margaret's imperative knock came at the front door, Aunt Beatrice started guiltily and wished earnestly that she had waited until she went to bed, before crying, if cry she must. She knew Margaret's knock, and she did not want her gay young niece, of all people in the world, to suspect the fact or the cause of her tears. I hope she won't notice my eyes, she thought, as she hastily plumped a big, ugly, dark green shade over the lamp before going out to let Margaret in. Margaret did not notice at first. She was too deeply absorbed in her own troubles to think that anyone else in the world could be miserable too. She curled up in the deep easy-chair by the fire and clasped her hands behind her curly head with a sigh of physical comfort and mental unhappiness, while Aunt Beatrice, wearily sitting with her back to the light, took up her work again. "You didn't go to Mrs. Cunningham's at home, Auntie," said Margaret lazily, feeling that she must make some conversation to justify her appearance. "You were invited, weren't you?" Aunt Beatrice nodded. The hole she was darning in the knee of Willie Hayden's stocking must be done very carefully. Mrs. George Hayden was particular about such matters. Perhaps this was why Aunt Beatrice did not speak. "Why didn't you go?" asked Margaret absently, wondering why there had been no letter for her that morning. And this was the third day too. Could Gilbert be ill? Or was he flirting with some other girl and forgetting her? Margaret swallowed a big lump in her throat and resolved that she would go home next week. No, she wouldn't either. If he was as hateful and fickle as that, what was Aunt Beatrice saying? "Well, I'm not used to going to parties now, my dear, and the truth is I have no dress fit to wear. At least Bella said so, because the party was to be a very fashionable affair. She said my old grey silk wouldn't do at all. Of course she knows. She had to have a new dress for it, and we couldn't both have that. George couldn't afford it these hard times. And as Bella said, it would be very foolish of me to get an expensive dress that would be no use to me afterward. But it doesn't matter. And of course, somebody had to stay with the children." "Of course," assented Margaret dreamily. Mrs. Cunningham's "at home" was of no particular interest. The guests were all middle-aged people whom the MP had known in his boyhood, and Margaret, in her presumptuous youth, thought it would be a very prosy affair, although it had made quite a sensation in quiet little Marybridge, where people still called an "at home" a party, plain and simple. "I saw Mr. Reynolds in church Sunday afternoon," she went on. "He's very fine-looking, I think. Did you ever meet him?" "I used to know him very well long ago," answered Aunt Beatrice, bowing still lower over her work. "He used to live down in Wentworth, you know, and he visited his married sister here very often. He was only a boy at the time. Then he went out to British Columbia, and we never heard much more about him. He's very rich and owns dozens of mines and railroads and things like that," said Margaret. "And he's a member of the Dominion Parliament, too. They say he's one of the foremost men in the House, and came very near getting a portfolio in the new cabinet." I like men like that. They are so interesting. Wouldn't it be awfully nice and complimentary to have one of them in love with you? Is he married?" I don't know," said Aunt Beatrice faintly. "I have never heard that he was." "There, you've run the needle into your finger," said Margaret sympathetically. "It's of no consequence," said Aunt Beatrice hastily. She wiped away the drop of blood and went on with her work. Margaret watched her dreamily. What lovely hair Aunt Beatrice had! It was so thick and glossy, with warm bronze tones, where the lamplight fell on it under that hideous weird old shade. But Aunt Beatrice wore it in such an unbecoming way. Margaret idly wondered if she would comb her hair straight back and prim when she was 35. She thought it very probable if that letter did not come tomorrow. From Aunt Beatrice's hair, Margaret's eyes fell to Aunt Beatrice's face. She gave a little jump. Had Aunt Beatrice been crying? Margaret sat bolt upright. "Aunt Beatrice, did you want to go to that party?" she demanded explosively. "Now tell me the truth." "I did," said Aunt Beatrice weakly. Margaret's sudden attack fairly startled the truth out of her. "It is very silly of me, I know. But I did want to go. I didn't care about a new dress. I'd have been quite willing to wear my grey silk, and I could have fixed the sleeves. What difference would it have made? Nobody would ever have noticed me, but Bella thought it wouldn't do." She paused long enough to give a little sob, which she could not repress. Margaret made use of the opportunity to exclaim violently, "It's a shame!" "I suppose you don't understand why I wanted to go to this particular party so much," went on Aunt Beatrice shyly. "I'll tell you why, if you won't laugh at me. I wanted to see John Reynolds. Not to talk to him, oh, I dare say he wouldn't remember me, but just to see him. Long ago, 15 years ago, we were engaged. And I loved him so much then, Margaret." "My poor dear," said Margaret sympathetically. She reached over and patted her aunt's hand. She thought that this little bit of romance, long hidden and unsuspected, blossoming out under her eyes, was charming. In her interest, she quite forgot her own pet grievance. "Yes, and then we quarreled. It was a dreadful quarrel, and it was about such a trifle. We parted in anger, and he went away. He never came back. It was all my fault. Well, it is all over long ago, and everybody has forgotten. I don't mind it now, but I just wanted to see him once more and then come quietly away." "Aunt Beatrice, you are going to that party yet," said Margaret decisively. "Oh, it is impossible, my dear." "No, it isn't. Nothing is impossible when I make up my mind. You must go. I'll drag you there by main force if it comes to that. Oh, I have such a jolly plan, Auntie. You know my black and yellow dinner dress? No, you don't either. For I've never worn it here. The folks at home all said it was too severe for me. And so it is. Nothing suits me but the fluffy, chuffy things with a tilt to them. Gilbert always declared that dress made me look like a cross between an unwilling nun and a ballet girl. So I took a dislike to it. But it's as lovely as a dream. Oh, when you see it, your eyes will stick out. You must wear it tonight. It's just your style, and I'm sure it will fit you, for our figures are so much alike." "But it is too late." "'Tisn't. It's not more than half an hour since Uncle George and Aunt Bella went. I'll have you ready in a twinkling." But the fire and the children. I'll stay here and look after both. I won't burn the house down, and if the twins wake up, I'll give them, what is it you give them? Soothing syrup. So go at once, and get you ready, while I fly over for the dress. I'll fix your hair up when I get back. Margaret was gone before Aunt Beatrice could speak again. Her niece's excitement seized hold of her too. She flung the stockings into the basket, and the basket into the closet. I will go, and I won't do another bit of darning tonight. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. Oh, how much good it does me to say it. When Margaret came flying up the stairs, Aunt Beatrice was ready, save for hair and dress. Margaret cast the gown on the bed, revealing all its beauty of jetted lace and soft yellow silk, with a dexterous sweep of her arm. Aunt Beatrice gave a little cry of admiration. "Isn't it lovely?" demanded Margaret. "And I've brought you my opera cape and my fascinator and my black satin slippers, with the cunningest gold buckles and some sweet pale yellow roses that Uncle Ned gave me yesterday. Oh, Aunt Beatrice, what magnificent arms and shoulders you have. They're like marble. Mine are so scrawny, I'm just ashamed to have people know they belong to me." Margaret's nimble fingers were keeping time with her tongue. Aunt Beatrice's hair went up as if by magic into soft puffs and waves and twists, and a golden rose was dropped among the bronze masses. And then the lovely dress was put on, and pinned and looped and pulled until it fell into its simple classic lines around the tall, curving figure. Margaret stepped back and clapped her hands admiringly. "Oh, Auntie, you're beautiful. Now I'll pop down for the cloak and fascinator. I left them hanging by the fire." When Margaret had gone, Aunt Beatrice caught up the lamp and tiptoed shamefacedly across the hall to the icy cold spare room. In the long mirror she saw herself reflected from top to toe. Or was it herself? Could it be that gracious woman with the sweet eyes and flushed cheeks, with rounded arms gleaming through their black laces, and a cluster of roses nestling against the warm white flesh of the shoulder? "I do look nice," she said aloud, with a little curtsy to the radiant reflection. "It is all the dress, I know. I feel like a queen in it. No, like a girl again, and that's better." Margaret went to Mrs. Cunningham's door with her. "How I wish I could go in and see the sensation you make, Aunt Beatrice," she whispered. "You dear, silly child, it's just the purple and fine linen," laughed Aunt Beatrice, but she did not altogether think so, and she rang the doorbell unquailingly. In the hall, Mrs. Cunningham herself came beamingly to greet her. "My dear Beatrice, I am so glad. Bella said you could not come because you had a headache." "Oh, my headache got quite better after they left, and so I thought I would get ready and come, even if it were rather late," said Beatrice glibly, wondering if Sapphira had ever worn a black and yellow dress. And if so, might not her historic falsehood be traced to its influence? When they came downstairs together, Beatrice, statuesque and erect, in her trailing draperies, and Mrs. Cunningham secretly wondering where on earth Beatrice Hayden had got such a magnificent dress, and what she had done to herself to make her look as she did. A man came through the hall. At the foot of the stairs they met. He put out his hand. "Beatrice, it must be Beatrice. How little you have changed." Mrs. Cunningham was not particularly noted in Murraybridge for her tact, but she had a sudden visitation of the saving grace at that moment, and left the two alone. Beatrice put her hand into the M-piece. "I am glad to see you," she said simply, looking up at him. She could not say that he had not changed, for there was little in this tall, broad-shouldered man of the world, with grey glints in his hair, to suggest the slim, boyish young lover whose image she had carried in her heart all the long years. But the voice, though deeper and mellower, was the same, and the thin, clever mouth that went up at one corner and down at the other in a humorous twist, and one little curl of reddish hair fell over his forehead away from its orderly fellows, just as it used to when she had loved to poke her fingers through it. And more than all, the deep-set grey eyes looking down into her blue ones were unchanged. Beatrice felt her heart beating to the fingertips. "I thought you were not coming," he said. "I expected to meet you here, and I was horribly disappointed. I thought the bitterness of that foolish old quarrel must be strong enough to sway you yet." "Didn't Bella tell you I had a headache?" faltered Beatrice. "Bella? Oh, your brother's wife. I wasn't talking to her. I've been sulking in corners ever since I concluded you were not coming. How beautiful you are, Beatrice." "You let an old friend say that much, won't you?" Beatrice laughed softly. She had forgotten for years that she was beautiful, but the sweet old knowledge had come back to her again. She could not help knowing that he spoke the simple truth, but she said mirthfully, "You've learned to flatter since the old days, haven't you? Don't you remember you used to tell me I was too thin to be pretty? But I suppose a bit of blarney is a necessary ingredient in the composition of an MP." He was still holding her hand, with a glance of dissatisfaction at the open parlor door. He drew her away to the little room at the end of the hall, which Mrs. Cunningham, for reasons known only to herself, called her library. "Come in here with me," he said masterfully. "I want to have a long talk with you before the other people get hold of you." When Beatrice got home from the party 10 minutes before her brother and his wife, Margaret was sitting Turk fashion in the big armchair, with her eyes very wide open and owlish. "You dear girlie, were you asleep?" asked Aunt Beatrice indulgently. Margaret nodded. "Yes, and I've let the fire go out. I hope you're not cold. I must run before Aunt Bella gets here, or she'll scold." "Had a nice time?" "Delightful. You were a dear to lend me this dress. It was so funny to see Bella staring at it." When Margaret had put on her hat and jacket, she went as far as the street door, and then tiptoed back to the sitting room. Aunt Beatrice was leaning back in the armchair, with a drooping rose held softly against her lips, gazing dreamily into the dull red embers. "Auntie," said Margaret contritely, "I can't go home without confessing, although I know it is a heinous offense to interrupt the kind of musing that goes with the dying embers and faded roses in the small hours. But it would weigh on my conscience all night if I didn't. I was asleep, but I wakened up just before you came in and went to the window. I didn't mean to spy upon anyone, but that street was bright as day, and if you will let an MP kiss you on the doorstep, in glaring moonlight, you must expect to be seen." "I wouldn't have cared if there had been a dozen onlookers," said Aunt Beatrice frankly, "and I don't believe he would either." Margaret threw up her hands. "Well, my conscience is clear, at least, and remember, Aunt Beatrice, I am to be bridesmaid. I insist upon that. And, oh, won't you ask me to visit you when you go down to Ottawa next winter? I'm told it's such a joy place when the house is in session, and you'll need somebody to help you entertain, you know. The wife of a cabinet minister has to do lots of that." But I forgot. He isn't a cabinet minister yet. But he will be, of course. Promise that you'll have me, Aunt Beatrice. Promise quick. I hear Uncle George and Aunt Bella coming. Aunt Beatrice promised. Margaret flew to the door. You'd better keep that dress, she called back softly as she opened it.